Okay, I think we are broadcasting. Welcome to the Community College Job Materials webinar. My name is Annie Dwyer, and I am the Associate Program Director of Catalyzing Collaboration, which is a Mellon-funded program at the University of Washington Simpson Center for the Humanities. I work closely on this initiative with Kathy Woodward and Rachel Arteaga, and it has as its organizing purpose the reimagining of graduate education. And just to provide a little bit of background for this workshop, one of the central programmatic components of Catalyzing Collaboration involves placing graduate student teams and mentoring relationships with community college faculty in the Seattle District colleges. And basically the idea is that they, through immersive experience, learn more about teaching in the community college context. And we started this workshop a couple of years ago when we began to realize that it's important not only to expose doctoral students to the community college, but also help them in terms of professionalization, prepare for the job application and interview process should they choose to pursue that career path. And the reason for this is that we've learned that research faculty, even especially at the University of Washington, we found people are increasingly more supportive of their doctoral students pursuing community college job careers, but we found that research university professors oftentimes don't feel well positioned to mentor students through that process. So we understand that that applying to a community college job requires a kind of unique angle. So we reached out to our community college partners to help us create this workshop. I'll introduce everybody momentarily, but I'd like to call out in particular Kate Cree. Kate, if you could wave, who, when she was Associate Dean in the Division of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences at Seattle Central, was my co-conspirator and co-organizing and launching the first iteration of this workshop. So I want to acknowledge that, of course, we're holding an online version of the workshop today because we are in the midst of a global pandemic. I know that everybody's facing additional stressors and some folks are really struggling. So I just want to thank you, first of all, for making time in your schedule in the midst of this. And I also recognize that graduate students are facing the already anxiety-provoking prospect of going on the academic job market, are probably wondering how the economic fallout from the pandemic will ramify in higher education. And that is, that's a really real concern, but without being overly sanguine, I want to gesture, and this will be, the link will be posted here in the chat in a second, but there was a recent webinar that was hosted by the American Association of Community Colleges, and it offered some really interesting silver linings. Community college leaders on that call spoke to trends like boosts in non-local enrollments, boosts in dual enrollments, and I think probably most saliently for the purposes of this workshop, a kind of expectation that community colleges are going to play a really important role in workforce development in the wake of the pandemic. So I think regardless of what the future holds, it's likely that community colleges will play a really important role, and it's all the more reason to be thinking about this as a career path. Before I move on to intros, I just want to communicate a few logistics for today. During the first half of the webinar, we are going to pose some preset questions to our panelists, just to make sure we cover some major talking points. And then in the last half of the webinar, we'll open the field to audience members to ask questions. I'll ask that folks post the questions in the Q&A box, and you should note that you can't unmute yourself, but if your question is selected for discussion, I may unmute you momentarily just so you can elaborate and clarify your question if needed. The chat box is going to be used primarily for posting resources, and the panelists will also be able to use the chat box to add their 2 cents in if they aren't able to get a word in edgewise in answering a particular question or to post their own resources. So it'll be worth your while to keep an eye on it, but it won't be something that audience members can contribute to. So just be aware of that. And then also the raised hand feature, it's not disabled, but we won't be using it to to do audience engagement or troubleshooting. So again, if you have any questions, just use the chat box. We have 2 wonderful Simpson Center staff standing by. The program and events manager at the Simpson Center, Caitlin Paulo, is here, and she's She's on board to help with any logistical or technological issues, as is Sarah Falk, who is our administrative assistant. So just to wrap up all of that logistical information, use the Q&A box, not the raised hand feature in the chat box. And then finally, I just want to note that the webinar is being recorded. So if you don't catch everything today, you'll be able to find it again on the Simpson Center website. Okay, with that, I would like to introduce our panelists. I could wax eloquent about them for the entire webinar, so I'm going to limit myself to an introduction that involves their names, institutional location, and discipline. And I would encourage you also to look at the link that Caitlin is going to post in a minute, or just has posted, and it has a full written bio, or fully written bios for each of the panelists. So so yes, I'm so excited to have them all here today. And I'm going to ask them to wave so we can identify a face with a name as I introduce them in alphabetical order by last name. One of our first panelists is Dr. Cristobal Borges, who is tenured faculty in the history department at North Seattle College. He teaches US, Latin American, and Pacific Northwest history, and has been a 3-time Mellon mentor with us. Kate Krieg is currently the executive director of the Pathways Initiatives at Seattle Central College and an anthropologist by training. And as I mentioned, in her role as associate dean, was also central to creating and strengthening our partnership with Seattle Central College. Dr. Larry Kushner is a newly tenured faculty member at South Seattle College in political science and a current Mellon mentor. Anthony Ferrucci is part-time faculty in philosophy at South Seattle College and Green River College, and he's also been a mentor in the program for 2 years. Anna Hackman is a tenure track faculty at, or tenure track faculty in the Humanities program at Seattle Central College, and she's a current Mellon mentor, as is Jen Jewell, who has been teaching English and Humanities at North Seattle College since 2012. He became a full-time faculty member in 2016 and has served in the Mellon program for 3 straight years. And then finally, Jinjin He Weatherford, who is tenure track faculty in English at Bellevue College and a former Mellon doctoral student fellow in the Reaching New Publics program. So having all of these wonderful people here, without further ado, I'd like to turn to the first question. And I think even before we get to strategies for applying to community college jobs, it is useful to think about what makes somebody a good fit for a community college career. So I'd like to ask our panelists what skills, what investments, what values make for a good community college professor.
Hi, this is Anthony. I think I am taking the lead on this first question. So I just sketched a couple of notes, and I'm hopeful that my fellow panelists can add on to this. These are just a few things that came to my mind initially. The first thing I would say is just having the right expectations, both for yourself and for others. And as Annie pointed out at the beginning, there are clear differences between community college jobs and jobs at 4-year schools. And so I think being a good fit at a community college definitely means managing institutional demands with an often rigorous teaching load is the first thing that I think most of us would highlight. Classes, at least in my discipline, also have no prerequisites. So being able to balance competing demands and teaching loads is certainly something that is often a shock to some people who are more used to the 4-year system. And also there's just really a noticeable difference in terms of emphasis on developing relationships. We have smaller class sizes on average. We're teaching a lot of courses without TAs. And especially being able to navigate the diverse backgrounds of the students that we have in our classrooms. And so I think if you're passionate about teaching, especially inclusively and equitably, you're a good fit for community college jobs. And one of the most rewarding things, perhaps the most rewarding aspects of teaching at a community college is observing the impact your teaching might have on such a diverse number of situations, from returning veterans, older students who might be retraining or returning after a long academic break, running start students who haven't even graduated high school yet, So there's really, I think you'd really be a great fit if you're really focused on teaching and serving often students who have come from such diverse backgrounds, and also the interdisciplinary nature at a community college. If you're really looking for that, I think you'd be a great fit for a community college job.
Would other panelists like to respond to this question?
Yeah, I would like to kind of piggyback off of what Anthony said. I think one of the other key kind of aspects of teaching at a community college, and Anthony kind of talked about this a little bit, which is the building of relationships. That's a key component that permeates a lot of your experience in a community college. So often we talk about smaller class sizes, even as a selling point for students. Well, that creates a very different reality for you as a teacher as well. You get to know your students very closely at times. And more importantly, they can get to know you. And that becomes a way for you not just to build relationships, but to be a model for students. As somebody who is Latino, I know that when I'm teaching, there are many times when I'm the only instructor that these students have seen that might be Latino, Puerto Riqueño, right? And so I know that I'm a model for them, and I may be a model for them in a very personal way. They'll get to know a bit more about me, my background. I'll interact with them outside of the classroom, bump into them in the cafeteria very easily. Where when I was teaching or TAing at a four-year institution where my classes were much larger, or I was TAing in large classes, I may bump into somebody briefly, but it's very much a more distant relationship. So when Anthony talks about really being able to have those relationships, you'll have them with students, you'll have them with colleagues, and that can become a very sort of jarring reality if you're not ready for it in your expectations. So that's something to manage, but it's also something that's really brings a lot of energy to me and to my classroom.
Yeah, just to build off what Anthony and Chris just shared, I tend to think of, the question of fit as a two-way street. So I think both of the previous panelists talked a lot about how, we have what the college is looking for, like such as knowledge on our own disciplines, the capability to handle a certain teaching load, and bandwidth to collaborate outside teaching, etc. But the other side of it is that whether the college, this specific working context have what we want as a professional, as a person, right? Whether what draws me to come to college is my personal, for example, my personal and professional investment in educational equity and working with historically underrepresented students, such as like Chris was sharing how he's able to be a model to Latino students. So similarly, I had this strong, I'm kind of driven by this strong kind of interest in working with, for example, international students, multilingual students because of my background in English and in multilingual education, etc. So I think evaluating personal and professional investments and things that I value really help me clarify, directions for my career in this sense.
One of the things I think binds together a lot of what was just said is just that overall orientation towards service, that I think that you're asked to be more of just a member of a community and to be giving into it in a lot of ways in a community college that you aren't necessarily while in a four-year school. And so if you are someone with more of a service orientation, I think you're going to find a more natural fit within a community or technical college.
Thanks so much, Jim, Jin, Chris, Anthony, for speaking so eloquently to what makes folks a good fit for the community college. I'd like to push us on to the next question. If you discern that you are a good fit, that this would align with your values, your investments, what are some major interview do's and don'ts in applying for community college jobs? What are some of the things that you should avoid? What are some of the things that you should make sure to do?
Hi, I'm Anna Hackman at Seattle Central College, and I think I can speak on some of the do's. And I'm kind of thinking of this question kind of not just in the interview itself, but kind of leading up to it as well. The first thing that I learned when I was kind of going through the applying for this tenure track position that I have now is realizing like how systematic it is, especially some of those first steps in the interview process. So like, so I would say first thing is making sure that you're really kind of reading that job description closely and really aligning yourself, your resume and your cover letter with it. Because those first kind of preliminary steps that the hiring committee is going to take, it's a quite literal checklist. So like, does this person have like A, B, and C that's going to move you on to the next piece? And it's, like I said, it's very systematic that way. So really kind of making sure whatever points are hitting in the job description that you're hitting in your resume and your cover letter. And really kind of being able to know what your teaching and professional experience kind of show, and where you're going to maybe kind of need to fill in the blanks as well. If say, for example, you're someone who's kind of coming in who maybe doesn't have a lot of experience in the community college setting, right? So being able to kind of show that you can take on those tasks, even if your resume might not show it as much. And I would also say really kind of develop a list of points that you want to bring forth. So that means your teaching experience, your professional experience, kind of show that you understand working in a community college setting, kind of like what a lot of our panelists said in that previous question, right? Kind of making sure you understand a lot of what our students are bringing into the classroom. And that'll help you develop really kind of key talking points. And I found that very helpful for me as I was preparing for the interview, is to have those kind of series of points and making them kind of long that I wanted to say. And I would work with people, like find people who I knew who worked in and who had been involved in hiring and do like dry run interviews with them and stuff like that. Because what a lot of community colleges will do is like right before your interview, it's like the 15 minutes before, they'll hand you the list of interview questions. So you kind of get them in advance, but you don't have a lot of time to go over them. So really kind of going over some key talking points in advance, you can really, if you structure them properly, you can fit them in to any of those interview questions. So really kind of having that ready. And so those are kind of the more, I think, the pragmatic things. But also, I think what's really important when you're preparing for interviewing and preparing for applying to a community college is really bringing forth your commitment to teaching. I think one of the challenges when we're in the kind of coming through graduate school and the R1 kind of model is we're really trained to be researchers, and we're really trained to kind of prepare ourselves for the four-year colleges and universities. So like a common, I don't want to veer into the don'ts, but, so really kind of making sure that you're presenting yourself as an instructor, as a teacher, rather than a researcher. And that's going to mean showing your, really kind of showing your experience, but also showing kind of your philosophy of teaching. And really showing a commitment to growth. That's the thing that I think has, as I've seen other faculty kind of go through the tenure process that I'm going through now, that really kind of seems to be the thing that can really get someone is, are you committed to growth? Like, are you committed to constantly learning? And that means like keeping up, not just with your field and like the way, like new literature in your field, but also keeping up with your pedagogy and really being constantly ready to shift, being constantly ready to kind of re-examine what you do in the classroom and always be developing and always be growing. That'll get you a really long way in the interview and once you're actually through the door as well.
That was such a useful answer. I feel like I learned a lot that I hadn't thought about, especially that piece about commitment to growth. I wonder if we can pivot to don'ts now.
Yeah, I have to give a virtual fist bump to my colleague, Anna, because she just crushed out of the park all of the points that I would tell you to not do by doing it correctly the way that she put it forward. I really have to echo the idea of don't skip over the job description. Don't think about this as a position that's in your field. You submit your documents and bam, there you go. How can they not consider you, right? Because you have teaching experience as a teaching assistant and an MA or PhD in hand. It's not what these schools are looking for. I've served on 4 job committees in the last couple of years, and it's very obvious when people kind of skip over that. The reason we put out these job descriptions is to hone in on what it is that our campus community needs to meet the needs of our students. And if you aren't spending the time to think about and address those things very directly, you're going to be in trouble in terms of getting a second look from a committee. Along kind of some of those same lines, once you get into the interview process, as Anna noted, there's only a short kind of period of time where you're going to have the questions before all of this kind of starts up. And in that short period of time, what you want to have are really direct answers that many times are going to be based upon, once again, that job description. So think ahead of time about what something like that might look like. If you do make it to that interview process, as Anna said, present yourself first and foremost as a teacher. So one of my don'ts is when you are, say, submitting your CV to a committee, don't lead off with any kind of research or publications or things like that. That's super important. It rounds you out as an academic, as a person. Start with that teaching first and foremost. You are introducing them to yourself as an educator first, and as someone who is deeply tied to the import of pedagogy within your own work. And there's just so many times where I've seen people kind of flip those things around, and it also shows to a committee what it is that you emphasize about yourself. A couple of things in the interview process itself when you get there. We're all academics. We can't shut up even if we tried, but try not to ramble, for the love of God. People are trying to get through these questions to get direct answers. Try to be as kind of concise as you can. Committees will always ask you follow-up questions if they have them. So don't be afraid to be direct and create more of that time. Also, have some thought. Don't be the person who comes into the interview and at the end they say, do you have any questions for us? And you don't have something prepared. Think about what it is that is important to you as an educator, as well as what you want to hear about what it is to be an educator at the college that you're applying to. If you get members of the interview committee kind of gushing about their love for their students and their colleagues and the place that they work, you're doing the right thing, because you're asking questions that are evocative of the things that drive us as educators in these institutions. And the other one is, don't go into this without testing out. We are all in the world of Zoom. I mean, this is our new reality for a while. Make sure you got this stuff locked down. Make sure, it looks the way it needs to. Make sure you're close enough to that router that it works, because I can't tell you how many interviews get derailed because of those tech issues where people haven't thought about those things ahead of time. So that's just a quick rundown. I could yell at you all day about things to not do, but that's where I'll start.
Such a useful list. I'm wondering if we could back up just a bit, and let's say address that kind of period of time between deciding you want to become a community college professor and actually getting to the interview process and job application process. What sorts of experiences should you pursue while you're a graduate student? Obviously, community college teaching would be a great thing, but if you can't do that, right, or if you can only pick up one class, what can you do to build a solid CV that will say, I would be a great community college teacher?
I guess just to get a conversation started, I almost want to turn, I think it's it's more of a matter of reconceptualizing what we are doing in graduate school rather than doing doing drastically different things. Because I almost want to turn this question around and say, what experience is not useful that we're doing in graduate school, right? That would be relevant to working in community college. Because I just finished my PhD program last year. So a lot of things I did in graduate school is still pretty fresh, and I'm just constantly making connections with the work I'm currently doing at Bellevue College right now. So to me, it's almost more of an ideological shift that I need to make, being trained to be, traditionally a professor, who's doing research in the ivory tower, to kind of making this shift to be more teaching oriented and more, doing things that are more public facing. So just to give some maybe immediate examples, of course, I didn't have any experience teaching community colleges before I applied for community college jobs, but I did have several years of teaching experiences, teaching English composition classes at UW. I find that experience to be extremely helpful in addressing some of the very specific interview questions, for example, and also to be kind of showing my natural commitment and interest in teaching. A big part of the job I discovered, before and after I started my work at Bellevue College is also like, besides my teaching, that there's this administrative aspect, right? So if you are, fellow graduate student, you already like participating in conferences, even volunteer in conferences, and even helping organize and run some conferences, these will all become very, very valuable experiences for later, And also a lot of the things we do as graduate students are naturally kind of training us to acquire soft skills, such as collaborating with colleagues, researching and problem solving, because in the community college context, teaching innovation is really highly encouraged. So if you are already kind of doing on grants or research project that are kind of getting that direction, I think that would be really great and be very welcomed as you apply for jobs. So I think I'll stop here so other panelists can chime in.
Just to add something onto that, I would say, at least in my experience in graduate school, there were a few opportunities to get involved with pedagogy and specifically curriculum. And I would highly encourage those of you who are interested in a community college job to get involved, if possible, in schedule planning, workshops on pedagogy, especially curriculum. So thinking back to my grad school experience, graduate students could help design the schedule, or at least give input, try to figure out which classes are being offered. I mean, those are all very valuable experiences. And I know that it's difficult to juggle the demands of research on one hand with teaching, but if there are opportunities like that in the department that you're in, it's certainly, I think, invaluable to get your hands dirty with curriculum and the nuts and bolts of course design and editing and all that stuff as early as possible. I think that would be some really great experience to add to the job interview that you could bring up.
Thank you both so much. Just because we're about to open up the webinar to questions from our audience members, I want to, before we do that, drill down a little more into the details of the cover letter, the CV, the teaching demonstration. If we could start with the documents, CV and cover letter, what should these look like? How should these be tailored to community college jobs? When you're working on these documents, what should you consider?
Hi, everybody. Again, my name is Kate Krieg, and like Andy mentioned, I was Associate Dean at Seattle Central College for about 5 years. And in that time, I've probably read 400 to 500 CVs maybe, and hired dozens of adjunct faculty and a handful of full-time faculty. And knowing Anna Hackman and her responses here right now, I think maybe one of my legacies could be that I hired Anna, because she is absolutely fabulous. And so a lot of the answers that the panelists have given really cover what you should be doing when you are submitting a CV and a cover letter to a community college. Embrace everything that the panelists have said and use that as your lens for writing your CV. I think keep in mind particularly that community colleges are teaching institutions, they're not research institutions. So I can't tell you how many times I've read CVs that start out by describing like thesis research, and that's something that we might eliminate almost right off the bat. Really what we're looking for is teaching experience or ways that people can translate their experience in graduate school to community college. And so just to reiterate what everyone else has said, if you have curriculum work, if you've participated in anything around developing your pedagogy, if you've participated in administrative tasks, scheduling, coordinating, anything like that, and especially if you've participated or honed your skills in anything related to student success. You know, community colleges are really about retaining and helping students complete. That's our mission. And we also, in Washington State particularly, say that we lead with racial equity. And so I would say do that work individually and also do that work while you're in grad school. What I mean is, like, personally take a look at yourself and do some individualized work around any gaps in your racial equity competence or knowledge that you might have, and bring that to your CV and to your cover letter. In the cover letter, I think also making sure that you're tuning in your language to what the job description is asking for, and always leading with how you have students in the forefront of your mind. How do you have experience mentoring them? How do you scaffold or break down your classroom teaching so that diverse learners who, as Anthony mentioned, may be at very different places in terms of having had other classes or any like English building skill course whatsoever before they're entering your classroom? How do you scaffold your classroom teaching such that every person can be successful? Or how do you scaffold your assignments so that you are giving students chunks of information and chunks of descriptions at the right time? Because how you might experience teaching in graduate school could be very different from how we typically think of best teaching in community colleges, which is more of that scaffolded, bite-sized chunks of information, content, and skills that build on each other explicitly so that students understand, like in a very meta way, why they're doing the things that they're doing in the order that they're doing them. And with the little bit of time that I have, I also wanted to address the questions in the Q&A because I thought they were really excellent. So Jesus Hidalgo asked, is it a good or bad idea, basically, to reach out to community colleges just to ask if they would consider him for a spot if it's available? And is that seen as good or bad? Because could somebody who's in a hiring authority position view that as someone reaching out to the college as sort of a last resort? And my response is no. Whenever anyone would submit a CV, I never, if you're in graduate school, if I know that you're applying to PhD programs or to other colleges to teach, that was never something that dissuaded me from hiring somebody. It was about what are the needs at that particular time in the department, and are you a good fit in the ways that we've been talking about? So I think go ahead and submit your CV for sure. Ellen Alness also asked, how important is it to have a PhD in hand when you're applying? It's not important at all when you are applying to be an adjunct. It might be a little bit more important when you're applying to a full-time position, but one of the last full-time positions that I hired when I was leaving, the person did not have a PhD in hand. It was much more about the fit that we've been talking about. So that's it. Those are two of the differences when it comes to hiring at 4 years versus community colleges.
Thanks so much, Kate. And there's also a document that Kate created on cover letters and CVs that's just been posted in the chat too that you can refer to. I'd like to ask now about teaching demos before we open it up. And this is a genre that's used in job interviews for community college positions that, that's unique to teaching intensive institutions. So I'd like to ask our panelists if they have any tips for developing and delivering teaching demonstrations in particular.
Yeah, hi Annie, it's Cristobal again. And I just actually wrapped up interviews where we did teaching demos last week. So I'm pretty fresh with the kind of tips on this. And actually, I'm going to share a few links to some more specific tips. But what I want to talk about mainly is really think about what the teaching demo is, and kind of some more kind of larger ideas as to how you can organize it for yourself. And a teaching demo, the first thing you have to understand is that it's not a job talk. It is not a time for you to show that you are an expert in your field. You know, your CV, your education, your degree, that's showing us that. And we'll see that through maybe how you decide to tackle your cover letter in a lot of different ways. A teaching demo is for us to really see, can you teach our students? That's all we are interested in. Are you able to show your expertise in teaching subjects to students? And so when you're thinking about that, now this becomes a very different exercise for you, right? You're kind of have to get out of your mold of, and you know, I was in this mold when I was a graduate student. I need to prove that I belong here. I need to prove that I have the expertise. I need to show that I can be a leading voice in my field, and so on and so on. That's not what you need to do in these demonstrations. What you need to do in these demonstrations is be able to show that panel that's looking at you that you have ways that are particular to you in how you teach, in how you connect with students, and how you might take something that's very complex and make it approachable to a student, right? Show your repertoire of teaching. Don't just show me that you can lecture. Show me that you have different modalities. Show me that you can actually take different approaches, because one of the things that is crucial for being able to teach at a community college is for you to be able to cover many different styles of learning, be able to access students through many different modes, be able to be accessible in the materials that you present. So one of the kind of standard ways of doing job talks, they're usually between 15 and 20 minutes. The ones I've been doing lately have all been 20 minutes, which means that you can't just take something that you cover in a 15-minute lecture and boil it down to 20 minutes. What you need to do is create something new out of what you would normally do. And this means that you need to do kind of what Kate was saying, really sit down and do some self-work. You got to figure out, who am I as a teacher? What do I value in the classroom? How do I connect with students? Right? You really have to figure that out. What are the sort of ways that I teach that really connects to my students? And now design your teaching demo around that. Your teaching demo should be a way to do that. So a very successful one that just happened last week for me was one where a student, not a student, a candidate that was really steeped in cultural studies and was applying for a position that we're hiring in intersectional studies. They really were able to show some of the key theories of cultural studies without ever actually addressing them. So what they did was take some of the more basic ideas in cultural studies about how images are not necessarily fixed in their meanings, and walk us through an exercise that got students to understand that by them showing that they have different meanings. And this person never actually addressed Stuart Hall, who's a leading scholar in that, or anything. What they did was show how that's done. And the students, and we were the students as the panelists, we saw what they meant and how an image isn't fixed. That was a moment that was very clearly a learning moment, where whoever is actually going through that experience can walk away and say, wow, I learned something out of that. And that's kind of what you're trying to do in these teaching demos, is show that ability. For them, it was using images. For you, it may be different. You may have a group assignment that you really love, that really works with you. Well, now think about, how can I turn that group assignment where the students get really involved, where everything is done, into a teaching demonstration that's 20 minutes. If it normally takes you 50, obviously you need to redesign this. So really think of a teaching demo as that moment where you can show as much of your teaching as possible. But it first has to start with you. Who am I as a teacher, and where do I see myself in the classroom? The last thing I would say is, whenever you start really designing your teaching demonstration, is continually ask am I showing what I want the person to learn, or am I telling them what I want them to learn? You want to do as much of showing somebody how to understand a concept and really for them to get engaged in it, and to really delve into that deep understanding, as opposed to it being very lecture based and just saying everything. You want to have a mix, but you want to kind of have a nice sort of area where you're not just talking and talking and talking and talking. And with that, I'll stop talking.
Thank you so much. Such useful advice. Okay, we have 20 minutes left in this hour that is passing by very, very quickly. So I'd like to open it up now to questions from the Q&A. And the first question that I've selected, it looks like there's 3 questions from William McKeithen. And Will, I am wondering if we can answer your second question, which is how much does it matter what field your PhD is in? I have a PhD in geography. While I could likely teach in sociology or anthropology, will community colleges nix me if I don't have a credential in the field of the higher? Hopefully I captured that question well enough. I'm going to experiment now with unmuting Will and see if there's anything else you'd like to say about that question, clarify about that question. I know you should be allowed to talk at this moment.
Oh yeah, yes. No, I mean that's it. Geography isn't a field that exists at lots of places, especially to my understanding, not at a lot of community colleges. And so I just wasn't sure if that's the sort of like checkbox thing that's going to be a problem or not.
And this is a good time to speak to disciplinarity, more generally speaking, too.
And I can jump in from personal experience. In the year before I got a full-time English position at North Seattle College, I was one of the final 3 candidates for the communications position, also at North Seattle College, because my degree is in English, but a lot of my professional experience was actually in the field of communications. And I was able to talk about how those, in one case, talk about how my professional experience was built on the academic experience in English. And then in the next year, I was much more focused on my academic experience. We have an instructor at North who has taught, to my knowledge, chemistry, physics, astronomy, and anthropology. That I think because we so privilege the practical more than the theoretical, there's a lot more opportunity to break outside of your discipline or to advocate for your set of skills and knowledge being appropriate to a discipline that is different than what your PhD is specifically in. So I don't think it holds you back. It just creates more of an opportunity for you to sell yourself to that institution based on more than just your degree, but based on you as an entire.
Yeah, I would add to that the last part that Jim was talking about is crucial. You will not be nixed right off the bat, but you will have to do a little bit more work in making the connection for the committee that in your case, a geography degree will be translatable and you can teach these things. So you have to take that into account in those documents that are selling you, the CV and the cover letter. But it won't just toss you out right off the bat by any means.
Okay, there's another question. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think that's why it's also useful to kind of, like I was saying earlier, to be looking at that job description, because sometimes, people are looking for like content and things like that you do have a background in, even if it's not your specific field. So like even if you're geography, but you maybe have some background in like, I don't know, like decolonization studies or something like that job description is looking for, you can really kind of highlight that. And you might also, a lot of community colleges offer interdisciplinary programs. Like my degree is in urban studies and I teach in the Humanities program, and I've also taught ethnic studies at other places. I've taught sociology. I've taught like in a lot of different fields. So sometimes those interdisciplinary programs as well can kind of offer you some flexibility, because you do have to really be able to kind of move through different fields of thought there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I will say, as someone who's done a lot of hiring, a reality check is that if there are a lot of applicants who actually have the degree, I was pretty well tossing out the folks who did not have a degree in that area, because I had so much choice of people who actually had the degree. And you know, if we post for an anthropology course, in our minds at the colleges, it's probably a very specific course, even though we might just have a very general pool. So it might just be about putting your CV out there a bunch and seeing if you get any bites based on what the college actually wants. Or if there aren't a lot of applications, that's when we might reach out to other people who, for whatever reason, seem to have something in their CV that actually spoke to the job, and give them a chance. And if you can build your CV like Anna has done, where you can show that you've taught a couple of other classes in other areas, that's super helpful.
We have another really good question about eligibility. So I'm going to ask Siona and unmute you momentarily to ask your question. You should be able to talk now.
Yes, hi. My question was about, as an international student, I've heard like from many different international students saying, oh, it's harder to get a position of tenure track from community colleges. And I just wonder whether it's actually true. Also, I really want to experience working at the community college, before I made a decision. But at the same time, my visa status is not allowed to work, more than 10 hours, like all of those limitations that I have. So I wonder whether actually the community colleges have a way to like hire the graduate candidates to work as a adjunct or part-time position, or it's just like closed door. I just wonder those issues.
Yeah, I want to respond to this question maybe a little bit from my limited experience as a prior international graduate student. I can really relate to that question because that's the exact question I wondered about for a while. I think there are kind of two parts to it. The first part is whether it's true that it's harder, if not impossible, to get a tenure position in a community college or college overall because of the status. So from my experience, at least from several years ago, at some point I almost heard that it's close to impossible. But then just for disclaimer, that when I applied for Bellevue College, I already have citizen, not resident, the legal status to apply for jobs and to work without having to like apply for international work visa like OPT and CPT. So that's that. But so my answer from my own experience would be that it's definitely not impossible, because I've come across colleagues in my current campus who is she's working, she's still on international visa, but I think she was hired as a tenure faculty in, I think that the math department, and the college is paying for her to process the legal like issues with her work visa. So I definitely see it done. If you just want to have the experience of, let's say, teaching for a quarter or a year as an adjunct, I think it really depends on your kind of specific situation. Because for me, it's like I got my master's before I move on to my PhD, so that allows me to have a kind of an international work visa, because like OPT, some things like OPT CPT, which allows an international student to work for a period of time in a field that's related to their discipline, right? So this type of visa comes with like a completion of a certain degree. So if you kind of have this, it's definitely, I think it's definitely more barriers for international students, but it's doable. Yeah.
Sarah Levitt has a few questions. Sarah, I'm going to unmute you and allow you to pose them to the panelists.
Yeah, hi. I can ask one or both of the questions. They're not really related, but sorry, I had to pull up my questions. My first question is, if your dissertation is about teaching and/or administration, is it worth discussing in job materials at all? And if you're going to bring it up, how does that make sense? And my second question is whether there's a place to, okay, Kate's answering it, but if there's a place to find job posts other than each individual college's website. But I think Kate has answered that question now in the chat.
Yeah, the diversity and equity hiring practices listserv is a place where I see all kinds of Washington State Community College job openings come through. So that's a good one to subscribe to. About your first question, yes, absolutely. If you are doing research into administration or teaching, you know, talk about what you're finding to be most useful, and talk about how you've either applied it in your own sort of TA-ships or teaching, or how you would if you don't have that experience.
Thanks. Oh, follow-up question about that listserv. Are there similar listservs for other locations that anyone knows about, or like national ones?
So, oh, sorry. I just posted the link to the website that I used to get my job, actually, which is the State Board for Community and Technical Colleges for the state of Washington. And if I sent the correct link, and this is the umbrella organization that manages community and technical colleges for the entire state of Washington. And you can search specific colleges or do a system-wide search for both Eastern and Western Washington. So I remember using that myself. And then also the, I don't know if anybody else would recommend it, but the higher ed jobs websites are usually pretty thorough. And those are national and even international, I think. So maybe we can post that link as well.
Great, will do. Thank you all for these resources. This is great. I'm going to now unmute Jorge Beona, who has a question. If I can find, oops.
Annie, I put it in the answered. I answered it by typing.
Did.
So if you want to unmute him anyways and just click on answered, and his question should appear there, I believe.
Okay. Jorge, I'm going to allow you to talk now.
So my question was basically just wondering about whether, when doing a teaching demonstration, if there was any, what would work better? Try to teach content, to demonstrate content that your audience would not know to try to recreate the learning experience better, or to teach, or to practice, or to teach content that your audience would know so that perhaps they can focus more on the way you're teaching it or something like that?
Yeah, and Jorge, what I was typing in is that I think either way can work, but I would say to actually not spend too much energy in trying to figure out what would be the better technique. What would be most important is for you to choose something that you know shows off your skills as a teacher. In part, it's kind of a two reasons for it. First, if you're teaching something that they are well versed in, then they're just going to see how awesome you are at teaching it, and that's great. Like they can connect with it because they know the difficulties of it. If it's something that they've never taught, then awesome, you teach them something new in that demo, and that's a big selling point. The other part of it, and why I say that you shouldn't spend too much energy trying to figure that out, is that really you don't know who the panelists are going to be. Unlike in a four-year college where I'm a historian, so if I apply to UW to a history department, I know it's going to be historians that are going to be the people who are in the committee. At a community college, that's not the case. In the last hiring that I did, it was for a position that is a brand new program, and I was a historian in the committee. The other committee panelists were all out of English and music. So we all brought in different things, and there were many things that maybe I knew about, but they didn't know about, and they knew about that I didn't know about. So it would be almost impossible at a community college to be able to tailor a demo to ensure that you're teaching something that the people there won't know, because they may not be coming from the same field as you. And that's something you have to keep in mind in these demos. You are really teaching, or you're really putting together something about teaching, how you show off your teaching. And you may not be in a room with people who are full experts in your field. You may be in a room with people who are experts in teaching. And that's what they want to know. How well do you teach?
If I may add on to this question a little bit, because as a job candidate, all the advice I received also told me that you should just treat your interviewers as students when you give your teaching journal, a teaching demo. But as a matter of fact, they're not, right? So it's kind of weird. They're kind of, I should be treating them as students, but they're not. And not all of them are even from my discipline. I think it's kind of weird thing to navigate in some ways, but in the meantime, like Chris was articulating, it's also a great opportunity to show how I can break something down to make it accessible to, student, quote unquote, students from different backgrounds, with different understanding of the knowledge I'm delivering. So just, you can probably take it that way. Mm-hmm.
Shen, and one interesting technique that I experienced quite a few times in this last job search that I thought worked in navigating that ambiguity and that kind of awkwardness was for the candidates to just officially say, okay, I'm going to put on my teacher voice. And then from that point on, it becomes very much, it's artificial, but now we're like, okay, we're students now, and we just continue. And then at times they actually had to break away from it. And they're like, so this is something that I would have the students do, but I can't do it on Zoom. And this is how it would look like. And then return to their teacher voice. And it became much more seamless, that moving back and forth of it. And just kind of owning the awkwardness and saying, yes, we all know it's awkward and artificial, but it's still important for us to do because this is what we're going to be judged on.
Oh, I'm looking at our time and it's making me sad to know that we only have 3 minutes left. I would like to just welcome the panelists to share anything that they think we should have talked about today, but we're not able to get to today in the last minutes that we have remaining. Any final parting words of advice?
I'll jump in again because I think the last question that the one that Lauren kind of posted is actually a really good one for us to consider. If you do not have much experience as a primary instructor, that's definitely something that you have to own. It's going to come out in the CV. It's going to come out in the experience that you have and so on. So own it and instead show how you have taught in other mechanisms and what are those translatable skills? What are the things that still show that you're able to teach? And then it becomes even more important to have a very strong teaching demo, because then that's the one place that this committee is going to be able to judge, is the talk really walking here? Are they able to, what they're saying, actually put in place?
Yeah.
I was
sorry. Go ahead, Jim.
I'm sorry, Anthony. I was able to balance some lack of experience in academic teaching with corporate training and talk about how it is, built on outcomes. It had a lot of similarities to the classroom, but I think you do have to be creative in the way that you find that you pitch and frame and shape your work experience to fit what you're going to be doing in the classroom. And it's definitely going to be a barrier, but it's not one that's impossible to overcome.
Just to jump onto what some of the panelists have just said. One thing that I saw a couple teaching demos a couple years ago, and it was clear that the teaching demos were the same demo that the candidate had given for a 4-year job talk. So I would just say don't, at least from my discipline philosophy, change up the demo. Don't make it just a one size cookie cutter. I'm going to give this same demo to every college, because some of the demos weren't interactive at all and they were highly specialized. So a job demo, a teaching demo that you would give for a 4-year school should be changed and tailored as you apply to different places. So don't just rest on the one teaching demo you have and never touch it. It should be tailored and specific and hopefully interactive.
Such great advice. I've been through this job materials workshop, I think 3 times, and every time I learned something new. So thank you all, panelists. We're so grateful for and indebted to your knowledge and expertise. Thanks for your time today. And thank you everybody who joined us. I really hope that you got something out of this webinar, and wish you well and good health as you move forward. So thank you. And we will end with that.